Okay, so let us get to this. The first question asks, says how some of what was said in the Taisho really resonated deeply. I would like to ask you how you would recommend that we reach out to our loved ones who are suffering. My niece, who is 26, has an eating disorder and suffers from depression. She has not been able to work for 7 months now and has spent much of that time either as an inpatient or in outpatient therapy. She has a sweet disposition, but her mind is so cloudy. I struggled to find a way to reach her. We learned last night that she had to be readmitted to a psychiatric hospital. Heart goes out. First of all, just the compassion and care that just flows from this question cannot but matter somehow. Already there. I know in my experience, limited, working with folks with anorexia, not as a therapist. It's so important to have that family support. And that's already apparent here. So what about just some very simple things I would comment on? One comes from that poem I read of Sylvia Ostertag, where she says, how can we, in a sense, dare come into the peace of this present moment when so many people are tragically suffering. That's how she put it. I know sometimes present moment is perhaps not the clearest word for this, but I think we all know what she's talking about. And then she says, might it not help those who are suffering for us to come into the peace of the present moment? In other words, this practice in some sense overflows. I believe that. I also just believe practically that your sitting, your practice, it makes us more available, more bare, more compassionate, a more compassionate presence. Perhaps a little freer to respond rather than react. I mean, I think you're probably there already, but that can often take a turn in a new way, in a fresh way that might be unexpected when we're available to it. The third way that practice occurs to me that it could really touch on this is also simple, and perhaps it won't work in this instance, but my partner, my longtime partner, was until COVID a psychologist in a psychiatric hospital. And he found that it was remarkably helpful to teach his patients. People are coming and going, sometimes a long stay, sometimes very short. He would teach anyone who would be willing how to sit and sit with them, just breath counting. And sometimes 3 minutes would be a good place to start. Just, in 1, out 2, in 3, out 4, up to 10. And if you get lost, no problem, no worry, don't try to find it, just immediately back to 1. We've heard this instruction. And, to then sit with her, if she will. But again, my partner found people who were even, quite psychotic, were able to do this. Not everybody by any means, but more often than not, he was surprised. And then he would get this feedback that it was helpful. They would practice it on their own, and it was some tool in a situation where you feel utterly out of control. I think, from what I've read about anorexia, that's part of it, and certainly depression. That there's something that we can do for ourselves can be helpful, I think, possibly. These are just what came up being touched by your question. What also came, I have no idea if this young woman enjoys reading or is drawn to it at all, or might be, open. And but I just wonder. And when I was sitting with this, the question got posted earlier. 3 books came up. And again, I don't know her, maybe she'd much rather read science fiction, or I don't know. But the 3 books that I thought of were Elizabeth Tova Bailey's The Sound of a Wild Snail Eating. Beautiful book. They were all by women. The other one, Morishita, Every Day a Good Day. 15 lessons I learned about happiness from Japanese tea culture. Sounds esoteric, but it's not. It's just the story of a young woman about this age who, against her inclinations, gets kind of roped in to taking tea lessons. And she just describes her experience in short chapters. Toward the end, there's a very clear opening, very touching. And you wouldn't have to know anything about Zen to read this book. The third one that came to mind was Natalie Goldberg's 3 Simple Lines. Again, a woman, a pilgrimage, a story, and beauty. And haiku don't, it's not glossing the world. None of these books do that. But somehow right in the midst of this human fallibility, there is great beauty. And I'm sure everybody here has like their book list. And anybody who wants to type something in, maybe just to share with one another, I'd welcome that. It's such a joy to run across something fresh and life-giving for perspective. At any rate, one other thing, and I'm guessing that the person asking this knows that there are some promising new treatments for depression. And so, I hope she's in good care in a context where there's some openness to perhaps some new orientations to treatment. Every good wish, every good wish. Let's see. how do I keep faith in humanity, in the Buddha nature of all living things, whatever that is, with all the atrocities that are going on in Ukraine and in the world? Yeah. You know, faith has that big element of don't know, really don't know. And yet, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was a Zazen Kai at the Maria Cannon Zen Center on a Saturday. And we were doing something at Mountain Cloud. Maybe it was Henry's Original Love retreat. And so I couldn't go to the Zazen Kai. But that Sunday night, I happened to have just dinner with my friends, Ruben and Maria Habito. And so I had the chance to say, you know, what did you talk about yesterday? And the war, I mean, it's, you know, the atrocities are coming more and more to the fore every time you open the news, but it was already horrific. Plus there's Myanmar and Afghanistan and the United States and, you know, as you say, the world. So but I thought, you know, in the height of what was going on in Ukraine, what did you talk about? Was my internal sort of dialogue or expectation. And Ruben said, I talked about amazement. And it turned out that he had played a 9-minute video that's freely available on YouTube. And there are many, many versions of this. If you start to go searching, there are 2-hour versions and, you know, 5-minute versions. But the one that he picked was called The Power of 10. And it starts where the camera is on a plaza in Venice. And there are these young people with, like, they look like hula hoops, they're acrobat rings, and they're doing little acrobatics, and there's a circle of people around them in the square. And, you know, it's just kind of a simple activity. And the camera's on there, and there's a little bit of narration. And then the camera pans out in powers of 10. So, you know, you see right on the square, and then you get up and you see all the surroundings, St. Mark's, and, you know, the whole city of Venice. And then you get up and you see Italy and, you know, that whole region of the globe. And you get up and, you know, you get the idea. You see the Earth, you see the solar system, you know, you see the Milky Way, you see, you know, from a view beyond that, where the Milky Way is just this little swirl in space. And finally, that gets out to the point where instead of, you know, this power of 10, it goes to light years. So, and it gets to the edge of the known multiverse. And then it comes back in. And it gets back to the plaza. The acrobatics are breaking up, you know, they're just kind of mulling around. And then it goes to a drop of water on a piece of grass. And it changes to a microscope. And, you know, just starts magnifying powers of 10. So it gets down to the tiniest, you know, particle, like the smallest bit of life, and then comes back. You know, that is your body. I was trying to convey that a little this morning, this entirety and its functioning, this whatever's coming up. So yeah, it's functioning in, that missile that hit the train station, killed 50 people, and people are just women and children trying to get out. And we know they planned it. It's functioning. And it's also functioning in the remarkable love that people are showing in that context, and all of the support coming in. And that woman who on the news a couple nights ago was, in front of a bombed out apartment building planting tulips and tires. They were on their side with some soil and these yellow tulips. What else can I do? She said. The Dharma. I'm suddenly reminded of Henry kind of speaking to this it was a different angle, but maybe the wide lens, And he said in, I think, 3.7 billion years, I could have that number wrong, the earth will fall into the sun. And there will be a big explosion. He said, it will be magnificent. And the Dharma won't go anywhere. That gives me faith. I know that's true. And out of this, it's not just, if there is the slightest bit of dismissal in this response, then it all is just dried gruel in a bowl. There's a saying in Zen from the Shin Shin Mei, or those verses on affirming faith in mind. If there's only a hair's breadth of difference, it is the distance between heaven and earth. In this one entirety of the Dharma, there is nothing excluded. And it's not the slightest bit evasive. It can't be. Even our evasion is it, actually. You cannot fall out of it. And also out of that sense of that, even if we don't, fully see it, we just sort of have intimations of it, or even just trust it. There is this response of compassion. Our compassion for the world, and also the sense that there is anything at all is compassion. And at the end of the day, whenever I reflect on a question like this, for myself or others, out of this somehow, we're also moved to help, to find what's yours to do, pay attention, witness, and act in a fitting way for your life and those things that are really tugging at your heart. So that's an unanswerable question, but I think it matters a lot to keep asking, and listen in the silence. That thunderous silence that cannot be divided. One more little story comes up. that I've mentioned once before in another setting, that this lovely student from Germany, long time practitioner, whose husband died about a year ago, and she's in grief. And a few weeks ago, she was sitting on a bench early in the morning, just sunrise, at the side of the meadow where her husband's remains are interred. Beautiful meadow. And she's just sitting there, so sad, she said. And she closed her eyes, and in that moment, the thought came, I want to kill Putin. So stark. And after a bit, she opened her eyes. And there was this wide field in the morning sun. And she said, a wave of love came up out of it. Nothing excluded. That's not our doing. You cannot divide it. So here's one that follows on this a bit. It says, your story about Karen reminded me that Maria Habito mentioned Sister Elaine's book, Light Sitting in Light. I tried to find that book, but it is a collector's edition now. It really is. It's very expensive. It's crazy. It's just out of print. Do you have that book? And if so, can you share something that Sister Elaine said about that light? Here's a very early edition, very, very dusty. This book is basically a primer on Zen. And, you know, she gave it this title. In the beginning, she explains, the foreword begins. Actually, it's foreword's written by a longtime student of hers. At one point in her study, Sister Elaine asked Yamada Koen Roshi, her teacher, what he thought prayer should be for a Christian. Elaine McGinnis is a sister, and long time Zen Roshi, and a sister, activist. Anyway, what he thought prayer should be for a Christian. His immediate response was, it should be the same as for a Buddhist. Prayer, Koen Roshi said, is light sitting in light. She doesn't write much about herself in this book. It's really basics on Zen, and connecting it with her own Christian heritage. There are some very accessible, lovely articles online about Elaine McGinnis Roshi, a tricycle article, an interview, more about her that's free, available. But one thing, she was given, when she was made a full Roshi, Koen Roshi gave her the Zen name Ko Un Ang, which means roughly little hermitage of a cloud of light. She has a book that's, readily available, called The Flowing Bridge. And it's the only book I know of that's a commentary on the miscellaneous koans. You would not have to be, investigating those koans to enjoy her writing and get a sense of how for her, these traditions just weave together in a way that is not problematic. She's not trying to make anything of it. She just writes about all these resonances out of her own experience. So that would be a way to read her. And I think that's it for today's questions, unless anyone wants to add something. That's what we're doing here. Light sitting in light. And it does bring Karen to mind. That, there's just nowhere to draw that line. Light, light just pervades. That's the invitation when you're sitting with Mu. If you are, to let Mu pervade, let it occupy everything, like dye in water that just colors everything. But say it gives it the color of light. That's it. Then what is this? Roshi would say, light sitting in light, or he did. Interesting master, such a, so grateful for within Sambo Zen, this whole net, this lineage of masters, teachers that he spawned in the West, because he was open to having Westerners come of any religious persuasion. That did not concern him. He thought that Zen, if you're Christian, Zen would make you a better Christian. And if you're Jewish, it would make you better at being Jewish. Just Muslim, Hindu. It just so happened that, that enough Christians found him that it became really known. Word got out. And he was interested and got educated. And often in his teisho, we'll mention something from the Christian tradition or that perspective, and he'll just say, "Of course, it's it's wonderful, just because there's no guile and there's no problem. It's this functioning of the Dharma." Another way of putting that is love is love. It doesn't matter what the name you put there, unless the name is some kind of scaffolding, cage, or wall. Then we sit and let it fall. So thank you so much. Oh, wait, could you tell us again the title of the poem by Sylvia Ostertag? Thank you. Peace. The title of this poem is Peace. And her book, it came from this book called Finding Silence. I don't know if this is also out of print. But I, within reason, I have it on my iPad, and I've been able to copy and send things. At some point, they say you run out of that. You've done it too much. But yeah, she had this practice of sitting every morning and every evening, and often writing a poem. And they came from her own experience, but they were also teaching Many of them are such strong pointers to this practice. But she is a remarkable woman. Um, she was a cellist and a therapist and a mime and a very busy Zen teacher and an author and a mother. And she got cancer by the time it was really clear what it was. It was metastasized to a number of organs. And she and her husband went to the doctor and he told her this. And then, you know, she describes this as this sense of shock and catastrophe that, you know, should go along with cancer. And there was a moment where the doctor and her husband stood up to look at the pictures, the x-rays on the wall. And she said, I took that moment to look into myself. And there I could find nothing like shock or catastrophe. To my surprise, she said. And then she said, this cancer me can't kill me. It is me. Just one existence. Troubled world full of light. One student who's been slowly reading Dogen, but with care, wrote just a short email, had been reading about these Dharma blossoms. You know, that was Dogen's phrase. And said something about how can someone who starts a war carry arms of Dharma blossoms, missiles of Dharma blossoms. And then he just said, this practice is hard. But it's true. And he did not stop sitting. Kon Roshi, one more minute, had that favorite way of expressing this world. You know, you're always looking for a way to convey it somehow. And I mean, he was brilliant and deeply clear. And he loved math. He was a mathematician. And so he came up with this analogy of the fraction, you know, the numerator and the denominator, whatever the numerator, you know, it's this computer screen, this sound, this cushion, this mat, the missiles in Ukraine, really, whew, the people planning, tulips, the Doctors Without Borders, you know, whatever you pick up, or just a pencil. That's the numerator. And the denominator is 0. Just to make it clear, he would draw a circle around the whole fraction. You know, this one entirety. And that one thing, whatever you pick up, that's all of it. It's so whole. And it's your body. Okay, thank you for these questions. And we'll have a maybe 2-minute break and then a 25-minute sit to close this main block of the day. Thank you.